Well, there's Scott Spann here. My sailboat officer in Sausalito, California. This is the third video I'm doing in a series. Started with an overview, then stepped into mapping. I'm not going to go back into those other videos, not going to recover that territory because I'm trying to get this done as quickly as I can. I will share with you, as I shared in the last video, that some people have asked me to make the video shorter, which is fine. At the same time, some people ask me to slow down and not talk quite so fast, which makes it hard to make a short video if I'm going to talk slowly. So I'm just going to be me. And if you find that I'm talking too fast, there's a little trick in YouTube where you can knock it. You can go to settings and slow me down. And if I'm too slow for those of you, then you can go to the YouTube and you can speed me up. I haven't had that complaint though that my voice is too slow, but I will get excited in all likelihood. I'm calling this 7 Steps to Team Alignment on the Path to Effortless Leadership. I'm using the term effortless leadership, you're going to hear me say this again and again, not as some idealistic state, but as an imperative, that we can't keep working harder and harder. It's not sustainable. And working harder and harder, we're not getting a better and better result from working harder and harder. And there's a fundamental problem there. So we'll talk about that, but I'll just touch on that. What I will say is that in this particular video, we're at this level in that structure of emergent impact. The notion of emergent impact comes from the complexity frame that I shared a bit of in the first video. I've got a deeper video on the complexity mindset that I strongly recommend you take a look at to get a sense of what's really going on in the world today in terms of increasing complexity and what are the kinds of solution sets, leadership styles, collaboration styles that are required for that. And basically, just so you know, in a complex adaptive structure or world, the solutions are emergent and they require strong collaboration. And I would even go so far as to say self-organizing networks in order to change or to improve or to enhance or to correct complex adaptive systems. We're at this level in this video working with a team. Or, it can be a group of anywhere from 5 to 7 to as many as 15 or 20 people I've done this with before. And it's how do we set them up to be in a place where they're ready to innovate, and most importantly that they're aligned and in the energetic state, the emotional state to be able to innovate. While I'm not going to go back to that earlier video, I do want to say that that we are struggling, and our struggle is primarily a struggle with reality and 2 fundamental aspects of reality. One, what it means to be human, and we tend to act against what it means to be human rather than with what it means to be human, and struggling with reality, you know who loses in that one. The other thing we struggle with is the reality of being in complex systems, and we tend to consistently and reliably and uncannily work against what it means to be in a system rather than with what it means to be a part of a complex system. If we can correct those 2, those things are innate to us. It's innate to us to be human if we're just not prevented from doing that. And I really think that we're pretty good at working in systems if we're allowed to do that and if the initial conditions are right and the rule sets are right. And I've spent 18 years developing the initial conditions for that and the rule sets for that. Have several proven case studies about that. Most of I think my engagements, by and large, they're quite successful. If we do all the pieces, every single one of them is successful. It's when we try to shortcut something that we get in trouble. And I'm happy to share those with you too if you want, the ones where we got in trouble and why. And when we do this, I typically get a 3-fold increase in the ability of an organization or a team to perform, and a measurable 3-fold shift. Typically, when I'm doing something like this, it takes me a couple of days to unfold it, but I'm going to try to knock this out in 10 to 20 minutes. See if I can keep to that. If you want a copy of this, then feel free to email me and I'll send you a copy. I don't mean of the video, I mean of the PowerPoint deck I'm operating off of or any of the illustrations or anything that I'm using. And my email will be at the end of this. So let me just quickly jump into this then. I'm going to use the example of Minnesota's education system. There's a subgroup there on politics, policy, and action. I won't talk here about how we got into subgroups or all that. That's part of a larger conversation. I will name a few of the key players just to give you a sense that these were some people that were, it was challenging to get them in the room, but the way we set up the process from the beginning ensured that we got them into the room. people that normally wouldn't have shown up in a room. We had Mayor R.T. Ryback, we had state senators, the school board chair, the school superintendent, the head of the teachers union. We had principals, teachers, students, and parents, and many other interested parties in the system, researchers and foundations and others showed up for this, and they were significant players. So there are 7 steps to aligning a diverse team. I'm going to name them here, and then we'll drop into them in just a second. So, in quite a bit of detail. The first thing is to discover our shared goal. There's a process for that, but and it doesn't take terribly long. You'd be surprised. We're typically more aligned than we think we are. We just typically aren't given the chance to discover that. Once we've got a shared goal, then let's describe what success in that goal looks like and what failure looks like in that goal. And let's determine the time frame over which we want to understand how that goal has been performing so that we have a shared sense of the system that's impacting that goal. Then we're going to graph how that goal is doing over that time frame, and we're going to use facts versus opinions to talk about the past to then teach us how to be into more of a data inquiry mode rather than an opinion advocacy mode. It's when we're speaking about opinions that we get into trouble. When we're talking about data, data's pretty accurate. And then we're going to deliberate about the future and then declare the kind of leadership role we want to take into that future. Those are the 7 basic steps. So when we're discovering a shared goal, the first thing I do in the room is have each individual in the room. I don't do introductions typically. I typically, not in the way most people do them. I first say, in this domain, in this case, the policy, politics, and that sort of thing domain, what do you think, what's the goal that you want to have for this domain? And I have each individual come up with that. There are reasons I do that. One, I do want to know what everybody thinks. I want everybody in the room to know how everybody else thinks. I want to see if there are clusters or polar opposites in the room around what they think that goal should be. And I want people to go through the process of thinking about a goal. It's not an easy thing to do sometimes. And if you haven't gone through the process of coming up with your own goal, it's all too easy to take pot shots at everybody else's goal. So come up with your own goal, and then we have them share those goals without conversation. Just get it out there, get the field up and running, get people's minds up and going about what the possible goals are, and then begin the team conversations. So we have the team then. Once everybody's shared their goal in the room, if there are pods of people that seem to be similar, we break them off into different pods. If they're not, we just divide the room up evenly. We have each person sit down and repeat their goal to the people in their pod, because they're not going to remember if there's 20 people in the room or 30 people in the room. They're not going to remember 20 or 30 people's goals. And then they share it again, and then listening for what they're appreciating about the other goals. And then once they've heard everybody's goal, then take a moment to come up with what they think the goal is for their pod, and actually write that down. And again, for all the reasons I shared before, it's not that easy to do. And if you've tried and done your best effort, you're not so likely and willing to attack other people's efforts at that. Then they share those without comment. And now let's get into the conversation. Once we're in our pod, we've got 5 or so people in a pod, and we've each we've shared our individual goals. We've come up with a goal for what we think listening to those individual goals is. Then we come up with our pod's goal, and then we bring the pods back together and elicit the keywords, and listen to those goals and elicit the keywords and craft a goal out of that. So here's the goal that this group came up with on this, what they call the Education Transformation Initiative. Very successful program, still going on in Minnesota, doing some pretty remarkable things. They're seeking action that compels political leaders to do the right thing. Now that's the high level of the goal, and kind of the key phrasing. You can read the rest if you want, but that's the big thing, is action that compels political leaders to do the right thing. So we take that goal here and we put it on the left-hand side of this axis, the XY coordinates, on that vertical one. We stick the goal in. That's the first thing we do. Then the next thing we do, these steps 2 through 6 now, are we describe success and failure of that. So you want to be able to name what a success looks like. Now, when you're doing this, every time you're doing this, when it goes from an individual goal to the goal for a pod, to a goal for the team, for the whole subgroup, to the what does success look like, you're iterating and iterating and iterating. And when you name success, people go, oh, that's what you meant when you said that. And it's a much more solid kind of a goal. And it's a much better goal because they've got the level of discrimination has gotten finer and finer and finer and finer. And that process, that continues all the way out the back end of the process. So we haven't named what does success look like, and then what does failure look like? So in this case, success was a critical mass of folks aligned for the underserved and the common good. And so that's much clearer than just that first goal was, first level of goal was. And now when we say, so what does failure look like? And failure looks like the status quo, because the status quo is not working here. So that's that second step of setting up the endpoints. Then we want to determine the time frame. Now, when you're setting up the time frame, you want something that gives you enough. You want to go. So the question I ask is, how far back do we need to go to be able to get a sense of the system that's affecting this goal? And so in this case, we were able to go back to 1970, and we said, okay, since we were at about 2010 at that point in time, then we've gone back, a reasonable ways. Let's go forward a reasonable ways, and maybe we were 2015, something like that. But let's go forward about a similar span of time, just to balance out the graph. So we got a time frame set. So now we say, okay, now let's decide where to begin to graph. And here's where I just simply, and this is the effortless part, I just stand over there and I say with my cursor or the whatever, I just say, okay, so where were we in 1970? Were we at a 9 or a 2 or an 8 or a 3 or a, where were we? And somebody else shot out 7 and somebody else shot out, no, it's a 4. And finally somebody says it's a 6. And at that point I'll say, so what has you say it's a 6? And they'll give their facts about that. And someone will say, oh, no, that was the minority. This is the majority. And they will actually come to consensus. I'm not insisting upon consensus, but they will find consensus around what they believe the facts are. Now, once you've got that starting point, then you use data to explore the past. And here's where, again, we're using facts versus opinions to do that. Because again, we're pretty good when we're on the factual side of things. When we're getting on the opinion side of things, that's when the trouble, the mess begins. That's when the mischief, as a friend of mine said, begins. So then we begin to say, okay, now what from it's a 6. Okay, then where did it go from there? And they'll either say, up, down, across, whatever. And I'll say, what has you say down? And they'll tell me. And I'll say, okay, so for how long, how down does it go? What's the slope of the line? And for how long does it go down? And they'll tell me that too. And then we work that all the way up to the present. Now, in this case, it's just been, in their opinion, it's been just a steady downhill slide. In some cases, it'll jump around. And every time it jumps, I'll say, well, what has you say that? And what has you say that? Anyway, we'll get a lot of data up on the screen. And there was even more conversation than what this data set shows. But the point is, they're exchanging now all this information they never would have exchanged if you'd said, read these papers or watch these videos or read this book or talk to these leaders or whatever. They're swapping all this data and they're all getting smarter, which is great about about reality. And then I say, okay, so then here we are today. And so the next question we say, okay, then where is this likely to go in the future, given that this is a system and these forces are at play? Where's it likely to go in the future? Well, this bottom line here, this black line is, well, it's going to get a little better, but then it's going to go down again. And again, we say, well, what has you say that? And they talk about all that. And that's a pretty somber moment when they realize that unless something radically different happens, what they care about is not going to be doing well at all. And this happens consistently, or I wouldn't be in the room, obviously. And then I ask the question, okay, well then where does this need to get to by when in order for this thing you care about to actually survive, to really make it? Because you can break systems, you can bust them. You've seen nations collapse, you've seen ecosystems collapse. These things do break and they don't go back together very easily when that happens. And so here's where they then have this conversation and say, well, it's got to get to, in this case, like a 9 or a 9.5 really fast. And that's what we're looking for, is what's the gap between where it's going to go if we don't intervene and where it needs to go. And here, again, we're not talking about what's achievable. We're not talking about what's reasonable. We're talking about what's the math of the system. What has to happen by when? And then let's just break that off and get clear about that. And then we'll worry about how we do that. Well, we declare leadership. And let me say what I mean. Let me back up and say what I mean by declaring leadership. That gap typically evokes an emotional state, and the conversation evokes an emotional state, and all the data evokes a mood in the room, and that mood is very, very valuable. And so I'll ask them the question of, well, what's the state of being that we need to inhabit in order to close that gap? And that's where you'll get these kind of things like you see on this sheet, which actually came out of this particular conversation, which was about a day-long process. because there's other stuff we do in the process. But the first part is probably half a day. So you get cataclysmic change. You get binary. It's going to be one or the other. No middle ground. Pivotal, urgent, focused, unapologetic, risky, radical. These are the words when we say, what's the state of being? We need to have different people volunteer up these one-word responses. Now, that's indicative of the amount of energy in the room. And I believe, the reason the energy in the room is so high is because of three things. One, I, as an individual, am clearer inside myself about, number one, what I want. I feel joined by others who want a similar thing and see reality in a similar way. And I'm in better relationship, not just with myself and the people in the room, but with reality itself. And that relationship is what makes me more alive and more present to what is really needed in the moment. Think about it. When you're on the street and you see somebody fall down, or you see a car wreck, or your natural impulse is to respond to the reality of the moment. And now you may dampen that, or there may be forces that cause one to dampen that, but that's the immediate impulse. So that's what I believe is happening, and we're actually using these system dynamics tools of behavior over time graph to create the initial conditions in the process to evoke that state of being. So let me give you an example of what I mean by internalizing this leadership, declaring leadership around these poles from work that a friend of mine, Jim Ritchie Dunham, and I did in Guatemala back in 2004, when this specific way of working was first arising, because I was doing the REAMP project at the same time with a friend of mine named Leon Mallory, and I was doing the Guatemalan work with Jim down in Guatemala. In Guatemala, we did a similar graph, and this is all in Spanish right now, but this was about the ability to self-determine, to determine my own potential, which eventually became my own economic autonomy, or economic self-determination. You can see here there's a line going down, which is what's going to happen. It's going to push them back toward civil war, going forward if things don't change, and where it needs to get to by when, in order to be able to maintain self-determination, democracy, and justice. And there's that gap. Now, when I ask people there you have to internalize these two states of being, what I meant by that is Robert Fritz talks about this in his work, and it's what I have called dynamic tension. That is, all of the people in the room that had been with CARE Guatemala 8 years or more were cynical, and they were on that bottom line, and all the people in the room who'd been with CARE for 3 years or less were idealistic, and they were on that upper line. Well, being idealistic or being cynical isn't going to solve the problem. Fritz contends, and I tend to agree, that a true leader has to be able to hold both of those potentials in their nervous system, is how I would say it, simultaneously. We have to be viscerally aware of, or cognizant of, and how do we do that? We have to be aware of what's likely to happen if nothing significant changes, and what has to happen. And it's that tension between those two polar opposites that creates the innovative juices for solving what seems to be an intractable problem. And we're going to have that kind of energy if we're going to solve climate change. It's not a reasonable problem to solve. To resolve our political system, our economic inequity, and other issues we've got going on, they look like they're impossible to solve, but we have to solve them. We don't have a choice about it. So that's it on this. I hope that was brief enough. I hope I didn't talk too fast, and I hope it made sense. I would suggest that if you have your own situation, you might go back through the video and play this out. How would this work in my own situation? You typically need to do this with a team of people or a group of people, but feel free to follow those steps. And again, if you want a copy of this, then email me. If you're watching this anywhere other than scottspann.com, head on over there, leave me a comment, wherever you are watching this. Give me a like. Don't like it. If you don't like it, let me know what you don't like so I can fix it next time or make something better for you. If you've got your own kind of a complex problem that you're dealing with, or your own struggle that you're dealing with, let me know about it in the comment section, and we'll see if we can't come up with something that will support you around that. And if you found this of value, then please subscribe. It's one of the ways that I get feedback about whether or not I'm producing things of value for you in this conversation we're trying to have here through this medium. And feel free to share it if you think there are others that would benefit from this. And I think I'm going to stop here. That's it for now. And As always, I hope wherever you are, this finds you thriving today. Take good care. Bye-bye.